Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people and leaders in my network. So these are great leads to get into these interviews to find those books that have made the most impact on their lives, their work, their business, whatever it may be. I want to get to those books that have contributed as much as they can and left an indelible mark on that person, my guest. And there are three categories of books that I cover in the series. The first book category, where they share with me a book that I haven't read. A second category, where we cover a book we've both read, whether specifically for the series or from our past lives. The third category is when I have the author and or publisher on to discuss the book that they've written or put out, that they want to get out to the masses, the message that they want to share, the tone that they want to put out there. And today my guest is Dr. Ernest Ellender. And Ernest has worked in the fields of psychology, life coaching, and martial arts for over 25 years before authoring his first book entitled, "This is How We Heal from Painful Childhoods, a Practical Guide for Healing Past Intergenerational Stress and Trauma." His advanced martial arts training combined with his doctorate in clinical psychology to produce his effective skill building curriculum for healing past childhood traumas and family dysfunction. Ernest was raised in Louisiana's Cajun communities that celebrate family life and a close connection to nature, and he spends his free time enjoying the wonderful Cajun cuisine, marshlands, beaches, and local microbreweries of South Louisiana with his family and friends. Ernest had reached out after hearing about the series and what I share on here through my guests, through the books that we find. We got to talking back and forth, and it makes perfect sense that, and just based on what I read in the bio, anybody that knows me, my curiosities, anybody that has listened to the series knows that there's a lot of keywords, touch points, messages in his bio that I find fascinating, including food, Ernest. I'm not going to lie. There's
Yes.
just so much there that I'm curious about, so much that's come up in past episodes. So I wanted to have Ernest on to share this time with me. Ernest, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the invite. I've been looking forward to this. It's a little different than the podcast I've been on, and man, what a fantastic podcast you got here.
I appreciate that. So, Ernest, I read the bio. Obviously, I have a lot of respect for, again, all the touch points, the food, Louisiana, the culture, the study of trauma, the clinical psychology, all of the pieces of your past and your experience. But in getting specific, who are you today? Meaning, what's the kind of work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis that builds into that bio?
Okay, let's see. On a day-to-day basis nowadays, I'm doing uh, mostly life coaching, in person and online. I just published my book, so I've been focusing a lot on book marketing and things like that. We have a crash course on that over the past 4 months. And then I continue to run my martial arts school. It's a predominantly grappling jiu-jitsu school right in downtown Houma. So my house is 1 block away from the gym, which is 1 block further from my life coaching office. So I can just walk around downtown and I'm situated there.
That's
My
awesome.
family is all my family is either in Houma or 1 hour away in New Orleans. So I'm surrounded by family and a lot of friends and just getting this book thing going. So
So, what does that look like in terms of having, you said it's your school, right?
yes, I started evolution training martial arts 16 years ago now. So we've survived 16 years in a small town, which is pretty challenging uh, for a martial arts studio. And when I got into martial arts out in California while I was studying in graduate school for psychology, I also got into grappling out there, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. We didn't even have it in Louisiana at the time. And
But today, when it comes to like just the work you do, so
uh,
how much time do you spend at your gym, and then how much time do you
gotcha.
allot to your coaching work? It's a good. I like the mix too. I love martial arts. I did Muay Thai for a little bit, so I
Oh,
have a deeper
nice.
appreciation for it, and obviously the coaching aspect. So I'm fascinated by how you make all those different worlds work.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I focus on so professionally, it's like I'm at the gym on Monday evening classes. So I run the kids class and the adult class on Monday evening. So I kind of start the week off having done my job at the martial arts school, and then on Tuesday I also teach the kids class. We're very particular about the kids class, so I run that class. But that's just one. class is about a 2-hour commitment on Tuesday. It's about a 5-hour commitment on Monday, 2 hours on Tuesday. And then the rest is like kind of managerial stuff throughout the week. But that's the main, time allotment to the martial arts school, and have some other just fantastic instructors and a gym manager who helps keep that place humming along, right? So then outside of that, I spend probably right now 20 to 30 hours on my computer, either at home or at the office, doing a lot of book-specific things, getting that going. And then probably roughly 2 days of seeing coaching clients. So right now I'm building that back up. I had taken a bit of time off to finish the book. Otherwise, it would never have just been finished. So I took almost a year to finalize that.
When it comes to your life coaching, is there a particular area or niche to the coaching itself? Is it broad? Do you have clients where there's like a similar theme to what they're seeking your coaching on?
So that's a great question, because part of when I was doing just clinical psychology, a clinical psychologist in Homa, I was basically functioning as a general practitioner. So you just take who comes in, who insurance covers and whatnot. So I just saw a broad range of whoever came in. Just since graduate school, my real passion, what I really enjoy, I enjoy really challenging things.
Mhm.
I like working hard. I like being challenged, and the childhood trauma and family dysfunction, like working through that and figuring out how to heal through that and apply order and stability to those environments, is what I really enjoy. That's what I specialize in. So
Yeah.
with the publishing of the book, what I want to do, what I'm moving toward, is more focused, more specialized on trauma specific coaching. So when people are aware that some of their background is impairing their ability to really connect in their family or succeed at work or what have you, that's the kind of coaching I would like to move more towards. Uh,
So
so,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, I'm very comfortable working with the broad range of, anxiety, depression, family matters, marriage counseling, all that kind of stuff. I'm comfortable with all that from all those years of doing it. Moving forward, life coaching and trauma coaching is my real specialty. I'm really enjoy doing.
And the next question will dive into your past, but I'm just curious because they're so close, seemingly, your passions, the psychology and the martial arts. How do you tie those together?
Oh man. So because I was learning a lot of jiu-jitsu while I was in grad school, they really overlap a lot in my mind and how I approach it. So a lot of my therapy and now the life coaching, the coaching is probably a little bit closer to the strength in that connection, because we're focusing on
Mhm.
developing skills, improving our strengths, and just removing obstacles quickly to achieve these goals. What does it take for you to thrive? What are your strengths to get there, and what are the obstacles? And if there are skills to develop, what's the fastest we can develop those skills? So in jiu-jitsu, it's in martial arts, it's the same thing. I want to win this thing. I want to be able to defend myself. And when I get into these matches, where am I losing? What are the obstacles? What skills do I need to develop? What do I need to understand? And what are the behaviors and habits and thinking that I need to do on a weekly basis to not just get there, but to remain, to be able to still hang. I mean, I'm 51 years old, and I just want to still be able to hang with the 25-year-olds who are just young and tough and like all aggressive,
Rolling all over the place. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's what I
yeah,
was curious about, if it was that where it's kind of like one is mental chess and the other one is physical chess.
very much so. And I don't know any other martial art. I don't know any other sports besides the martial arts where it's such a direct. There's not even, it may be the gloves, but besides that, there's no other things to distract you from. It's just my hands against your hands,
Yeah.
my body against yours, and it's so stripped down to the most basic functioning. It's it's just so intense and aggressive. Aggressive in a good way, because
Yeah.
on our mats, I mean, we It's a community of people who are so very respectful and I'd say loving. I mean, it's a wonderful training environment. It's a bunch of healthy, also like respectful people who we have to look out for look out for one another, because I don't want to hurt you because then I don't have a training partner. So when we get in that environment, it's like we all respect and care for one another, and then we try to beat each other up as we encourage each other to become stronger and stronger. So it's a lot of really fine-tuned boundaries and interpersonal functioning in that environment.
Ernest, you just mentioned, I
Yeah.
think you said before the word aggression, respectful
Mm,
aggression. Is that what you said? I
yeah.
think I think that's what you
Yes.
said.
Aggression.
Um, what's come up here in the past is, even just last week on a conversation I had on here, was the power of emotions,
Mm,
how important they are, that we shouldn't do away with them. Anger, for instance, that we shouldn't just do away with it. We should understand it. We should
mm,
give into it in so many ways. That's what caught my ear when you said that.
mhm.
Can you speak to something like that in terms of like an energy that we have, aggression? Like there is good aggression, there is good movement in your body, there is like this primal energy we have that I believe that we have to get out of our bodies in some way, shape, or form. For me, if I don't, not martial arts, I haven't done it in a while, but
Mhm.
working out or this, whatever it may be, playing music, something about this energy where if it stays in me too long, it becomes anxiety. It becomes just like this spinning circle of energy that I have to get it out of my system. Can you speak to it?
Yeah.
And I know this kind of catches you off guard. It's not one of my standard questions, but if that makes sense to you, how do you speak to that in terms of the need to get certain energies, aggression out of
Yeah.
ourselves?
Yeah. And I mean, right off, I'm just a huge fan of understanding Mother Nature, how our bodies and how our minds work. So it's just fascinating to me. And we do have, the anger comes with oftentimes with adrenaline. So it's a motivating emotion. So it's such a natural part of our existence. We want to have a system for it. If we haven't studied or practiced it, like in a lot of these combat sports, in football, soccer, and all these, the coaches hopefully do a good job of teaching the athletes how to interact with that anger. Does it drive you? Can it drive you in a positive way while not spilling over into antisocial aggression?
Hmm.
Can you let it drive you and still maintain very positive relationships and great sportsmanship? Are you directly connected to the anger and it's driving you blindly, or is it in a measured fashion? And each of those things have ways of training ourselves into it, of stepping a little bit away from that anger, learning about it, and then allowing it to come in a very purposeful fashion. So some fighters will come out to really heavy metal stuff so that it ramps up the aggression so that they're ready with that anger to use it properly in the ring. And then others come out and they know that they don't function well with anger, so they're playing all kind of chill music because they want to chill. They function better, they fight better, chill, you know? So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
per the individual, but each one, and then also in the family realm, each person has to understand how they interact with their anger and then develop a system that enables them to utilize it in a positive fashion, not in a negative fashion. Most of the time in our family relationship scenarios or with our significant others, anger's not very helpful there.
yeah, yeah.
And so we want to have a means of addressing it. So with anger, for example, part of our curriculum in anger management is, anger itself. I think of anger as an emotion, umbrella emotion, and it's covering up all these other emotions. Anger just
Hmm.
doesn't happen by itself. I don't
Hmm.
just have anger. There are other emotions that are driving it. Like if you've embarrassed me somehow, or I feel embarrassed by you somehow, that I don't like feeling embarrassed. That feels weak and vulnerable to me. So anger feels much better. And so I come out at you aggressively for disrespecting me, but the emotion that was driving was embarrassment. And why do I feel embarrassed? What do I care about that? So the system we can set up, understanding that, with some education and some training, I feel my anger, but before reacting, I breathe, plan out, check for what emotion's running at. Oh, it's embarrassment. Is this
Mm.
somebody I care about, or is this a public thing? What's the embarrassment? Why do I have an issue with that? Did I actually
Yeah.
make a mistake or what? Let me do a
Yeah.
little introspection there.
Yeah. It's amazing how we might think, yeah, there are a lot of moments where we see it, anger in response to something
Mhm.
in the moment, but it's amazing how anger can linger and it's reacting to something that happened a couple days ago, a week ago, a month ago. It just,
Or
but
in
it's amazing
childhood.
how we look at, so when it comes out, you're like, where the hell did that come from? And the person,
Mhm.
who sees it. But it's amazing how we see anger as proactive and so many times it's reactive. Again, something to in the
Yes.
moment or yesterday, last week, last month.
Uh, yes, very reactive. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
you
had to
can't put
pick
our
your
finger.
brain between, my respect for the martial arts, being a doctor, studying psychology. I'm just always curious about the connection between the mind and martial arts. So I appreciate you indulging me in that question.
Anytime. I love those kind of those. I love those discussions because again, that my martial arts training went side by side with my psychology training through the whole time. And it was really wonderful because in these talking environments, there's so much talking. You just sit there and talk in a class talking, and one-on-one in session you're talking, and so it often lacks that very physical interaction. So when I had these physical interactions that were just so much more intense and concrete and weekly, that it gave me a lot of very obvious things to very concrete examples to apply these concepts and theories that I'm learning in
Yeah,
class.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
And then
Uh-huh.
the question where I usually go next, Ernest, is to understand how you got here. I like to go into people's history, usually beginning when they're going into college or into the workforce to see what it was that set them on that path. What were the first couple steps? What did that look like into college or into your career? And then if you could give me a walkthrough to today, just to kind of give us a sense of who's speaking to us and who wants to share the books on the series. So we want to get a sense for who you are.
All right. Let's see. I'm just always a bit of a people person. I love hanging out with my friends and family. Like we spend a lot of time just doing stuff. We do swim, hydro slide, water ski, hunting, fishing, that sort of stuff. So I really enjoyed a lot of physical activities. I enjoyed a lot of kind of intense activities. Used to get in a little bit of mischief and whatnot. So just turned on by challenging things. In college, I was enjoyed English literature, but I didn't want to go and do that as a profession. So what's another similar profession where we're dealing with great characters and understanding human behaviors? Well, psychology. So in undergraduate, I started working at a mental health hospital here in town just to see whether I think that was the right environment for me. And just working with other staff members when people were struggling, like, man, this is a really tough place to work. It felt so easy to me because I enjoyed working with other people and really enjoyed just helping other people. And it kind of became this reality, like it became this goal, like, wow, we really can make it your job to sit there and just help people all day.
Hmm.
And that was very attractive to me. I think, yeah, that was very attractive to me. My family just has a history of being really community oriented. My parents are very religious. I'm not very religious, but I hold that same desire to contribute to the community. I want to build the community stronger somehow. I want to serve it somehow. I feel better. I feel sleep well at night knowing that I've specifically done something that day or that week or this month to make the community better by making its individual members stronger. My coaching clients or my jujitsu students, my kids' classes, it just feels very good to be involved in that, be a part of that.
So when it comes to you, when you say you used to get into a little bit of mischief, and then when you
Mm.
got to college, you initially were thinking English or literature. What's the connection there?
Uh, I don't know.
Like
We
how
just
does a kid that's into mischief,
uh,
I might be stereotyping, but how does a kid that gets into some kind of mischief or however you want to say it, What's the connection between that and literature and English? Were you surrounded by it
Yeah.
as a kid? Like, how does that come about?
I guess we just enjoyed intense activity. So we would go, I mean, we drank a lot and we played cards and whatnot in the bars and everything. So a lot of that. We would go, uh, they have a couple of bridges around town. We'd go and we'd go install our own big rope swings and swing from like 3 stories high. And then police would come and cut it down and you go put another one up and just, just small town kind
Yeah,
of like
yeah.
fun stuff. But it was an attraction to these intense things. And in the schooling, when I got into the higher level psychology classes, like, man, just cognitively, it was very challenging and intense. And I was drawn to it. It was confusing. And like, well, how do people learn like this? Well, how do you control this? What is it? Those higher level discussions and theories and whatnot were really turned on my brain. Like those physical activities gave me a lot of just stimulation in the physical realm.
But you said when you
So
first got to school, you were thinking of English before psychology. You were thinking like English or literature, right?
yes, and I mean, when I would read these books with all these greatest characters, Dostoevsky, Nabokov, and like Hemingway and Pat Conroy, like these characters that are out there, like
Yeah.
Pat Conroy. I was introduced to Pat Conroy in high school, a Jesuit in New Orleans. My parents were really into education, so they said I was able to go to Jesuit in New Orleans, which is just an amazing, intense school. So I was in the honors program there, and they assigned one of Pat Conroy's books, and then I instantly read all the rest of his books because the characters he portrayed were these just out there, crazy,
Okay, that's the
pure
connection.
Southern, pure Southern kids and families that were extremely dysfunctional. Like I guess that'd be the most direct
Okay,
connection is Pat
okay,
Conroy.
okay.
The Prince of
S-
Tides, The Water
Yep.
is Wide, those things are like, oh man, The Prince of Tides was that consumed like my little brother and I's brain for a couple of years. And, in the characters in there playing in the swamps just like we were and getting into mischief just like we were.
Yeah,
They had much more dysfunctional families, but we have a fair amount of dysfunction in my own family, not
yeah.
too shabby. Uh,
So
yeah.
undergraduate psychology,
Undergraduate English first, graduated
English first.
English, and
Okay,
then I went back for psychology. It took me a long time to finally get my PhD. I wasn't sure what I wanted, and I kept working in these areas to make sure to see, yeah, I think that is what I want, and move closer and closer to it. And then, yeah.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, yeah, so I did 4 years undergraduate English, graduated, went to Europe, studied there for almost a year, came back, did another 2 years of undergraduate in psychology or three to do all the prerequisites to get into graduate school. And
Gotcha.
then once I got in, it was a program that goes right from your undergraduate degree to your PhD. So I
So
went
you had
from,
mentioned
yeah,
before, like the jujitsu, the martial arts came kind of in tandem with your graduate studies. How did you end
yes.
up going into jujitsu or looking for a martial art to start practicing?
Yeah. Let's see. I did have 1 year and I went to 1 year Boston College at 18 years old. Didn't do well there socially, came back home. So I got to do 1 year of like a Japanese style jujitsu. And it just was a teaser. It was in my head and I loved it intensely, but we didn't have anything like it here in my small town in Homa back then. So I kind of laid that passion aside because I didn't have access to it. And then when I went out to grad school, what was that? 10 years later, I was in graduate school in Mountain View, California, uh, or Palo Alto, California.
Mhm.
And driving around, I was there for a year, and I was driving around, and I saw a Gracie Jiu Jitsu sign in the window,
Mm.
and I just turned around, went in the parking lot, went in and signed up. I was so I was like, oh, I'd almost forgotten about this thing, and suddenly it was available right there. And I knew I would be there at least another 3 years, and in 3 or 4 years, you can get to a level where you're
Oh
pretty
yeah.
advanced. So that's all
So
I
this was how many years
wanted.
after the initial jujitsu that you
Let's say at 18, so that would be about 9 years later. Yeah.
9 years? Okay.
So I
Okay.
got well, yeah, 8 years later. I trained, I did Japanese Jiu Jitsu from 18 to 19 years old. And then at 27, I started the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Brazilian. So then after grad school, what after grad school?
I did 7 years graduate school out in California, 1 year internship in New York. Had another fantastic school in New York that I got to train at, Brian McLaughlin's uh, Precision Mixed Martial Arts. And then when I graduated from grad school, finished up my internship and all that, I came straight back home. And by that time, they had a couple of little schools around here in our towns, south of New Orleans, and we've just steadily been building the grappling martial arts sport in our parishes, in our
Was it
local parish.
always was it always your plan to go back home?
Yeah, yes. I love traveling. I hope to start traveling again a bit next year, and we'd love to do book signings and whatnot, or whatever I can do. I do love traveling, but as far as my home base, my parents are still
It's
here,
home. It's
my
home.
family's here, and I mean, my experience of childhood of growing up in the swamps here was just really positive. I I love it as a home base. I love South Louisiana, even though it has a lot of issues on the bottom of the entire nation and whatever you name it,
Yeah.
education and health measures and all that. But I'd like to be a part of trying to improve that and change that.
No, it's
I want.
amazing.
I'm planted here. Love
Awesome.
travel, but I'm planted here.
So Ernest, once you start working, what is it that guides you towards or draws you towards the field of trauma, family dysfunction? As you're going through your career, what is it that pulls you in that direction?
You know, I also have a tremendous love of movies. All right. So all growing up, my little brother and I watched movie after movie after movie. I mean, we love movies, and in the '80s, a lot of that was, uh, Sylvester Stallone and Rambo and all that, and uh, Charles Bronson and
Oh
Chuck
yeah, I know
Norris,
it.
and it was really big in these Vietnam War movies. And so years later, as in graduate school, we had the opportunity to work at the Veterans Administration, the National Center for PTSD, which is right down the street from where my school was. And so finally, I got one of my childhood like fantasies was to be able to be able to serve that population of Vietnam veterans who had just experienced so much back then, and so I got to do that for 4 years. I got to work at that national center, although I worked more in the women's program actually, but I did get to do a lot I got to do a lot in both. And so uh, that was what kind of got me there. And then I guess again, just the complexity of healing from trauma. It's really challenging, and there's so many facets to it. And just trying to understand it. I love being challenged to try to understand something and then try to figure out a system for how to make it function better. So I love building things. I love being challenged, and I love building things. I would love to build something and get it running and then go and do something else and build
The
something and get it
next one.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that explains the dysfunction, the trauma piece. Now, what about the intergenerational piece? As we dive into the book in the next couple minutes, everybody will see what the title of the book or hear what the title of the book is.
hmm
And part of it is, or I mentioned it, intergenerational. Where was the pull for that? How did that come about?
Uh, so while working with all these men and women, uh, both military and non-military, it was like 50-50. I worked there plus a bunch of other places in grad school. But there was just this consistent thing where if you have 10 people go off to battle or 10 people experience a car accident, 5 of them develop a horrible case of PTSD, and 5 of them naturally on their own heal past it. And one of the major contributors to that, like what differentiates those two groups of people? Why did these 5 have a bad outcome and these 5 have a better outcome? Well, the history of childhood trauma. Did they have prior trauma? that was a major factor.
Mm.
And so that started me saying, oh, okay, so now I have to understand to help these people, if half of them, if most of them who are having all this trouble with this adult trauma, this adult dysfunction had the childhood stuff, well, then we naturally have to be able to understand the childhood stuff. So that started me focusing on that. And then there was this one presentation that Marsha Linehan, who does dialectical behavior therapy, she did a speech uh, at Stanford that I just went to, and she put the MRI images of adults who had experienced a lot of childhood trauma next to the images of adults who had not had a lot of childhood trauma. And she showed us, you could highlight the brain structures that were different.
Mm-hmm.
So the brain actually developed differently. So they had areas that were enlarged, like that fight, flight, that survival response part of the brain. That part of the brain was enlarged.
Mm-hmm.
So they were, and then the part of the brain that has to do with putting with like high level thinking and
That
thinking
would
about
stop that
else
emotion.
that would stop it was
Yeah.
emaciated, was
Yeah.
underdeveloped. And so that was a real pivotal moment where, oh, okay, we need to go a lot deeper into this. I need to study a lot more and understand a lot more, because when you're talking about neural tissue, you can't just tell somebody something and it's fixed, because that neural tissue has to change. It has to go through its muscle building, the
Mm-hmm.
myelination and all that. It has to have repeated therapeutic
Like the
activities
neural
for many
pathways.
months.
Yeah.
To develop
Yeah.
those neural pathways, it takes repetition over many months to repair that stuff. And so that got me focusing more on, well, why is this happening in childhood? And what do we do about it in adulthood?
Um, and then at what point throughout this work do you, or maybe you already have at this point, or we're thinking about it, pull off to establish your own practice?
Oh, right after I graduated, it takes a while you got to take the, what do you call it? The licensing exam, get your license and all that. So I studied for a year after graduate, and I got a position at Nichols at this state university, just 20 miles from my house.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to work there for 2 years in the counseling center while I was getting licensed and doing all that. And it was a really phenomenal experience. So for 2 years, I got to have my own clients for a long period of time. A lot of graduate school is you're doing 3 months in this location, and then you go over here for 4 months, and then 3 months. So you don't get to keep a lot of your clients for long periods of time. So
Gotcha.
this was a 2 year time frame during which I got to keep my own clients for a long period of time and get to see that progress over time and get comfortable with my own style of therapy, like just getting into, I really like the cognitive behavioral therapy, and it was just getting that practice, running that practice and seeing how it interacts over 2 years time instead of just over a quick 3 year sprint.
Yeah.
So it was really invaluable. But as it relates to our topic and my specialty, I was also suddenly introduced to a lot of uh, uh, people, a lot of clients from my hometown and from even small towns around mine, who had just experienced an extraordinary amount of trauma. And it strained credibility how one family could have that much awful trauma over so many decades and over multiple generations without any kind of outside intervention. Like, it was like crazy to me how
Yeah.
somebody could have so
Just
much.
programmed in your DNA. I mean,
Yes, it's programmed DNA, habits, and the whole. It's like down the bayou, they just didn't call the police, so there's no outside intervention. So there's so much alcohol, drugs, violence, sex, there's just so much of it that it created this in isolation and a lack of, education and connectivity. It just allowed these traumatic things to just proliferate. So it was these individuals sitting in front of me, it was just kind of jaw dropping. Like, how, like, you experienced all that in your one childhood. Like, how can one person be abused by 8 different people
Yeah.
throughout the childhood, and then in adulthood have these terrible, like, abusive, like, how can one person experience so much trauma?
Yeah.
And that's what led me to really want to do, to really kind of focus on, I want a curriculum. I want a
Mhm.
curriculum, and I couldn't find a holistic curriculum, a comprehensive curriculum that addresses or puts in front of you the things that we need to deal with. In other words, I learned a bunch of ways, like, let's say somebody has a hyperreactivity to a trigger. They get triggered by something, and every time they have a strong response to it. Well, there are 8 or 10 different treatments for getting them to calm down and not have that reaction. And that's great. That's one part of it. But what about boundaries with a toxic father? It didn't address that. So then there's a different one for that, and a different one. So there was not a comprehensive laundry list of things we have to address. And that was my goal. I wanted to come up with that kind of a curriculum.
So, and speaking of the curriculum, in the bio, I read how your advanced martial arts plays into that curriculum. Am I reading that right? That it
That's
helped it it helped
very much
fashion
so.
that. Can you just speak to that a little?
Very much so. It's for one, just understanding the difference between education and training. So when somebody comes into our martial arts studio and they say, "I want to learn how to defend myself," so great. Well, we need to know how to defend ourselves, uh, verbally, physically, with grappling, holding on to somebody and twisting and turning, and striking. And so at the end of, let's say, 1 week, somebody can really understand that we run through these little drills, and they understand in their brain, they understand. They've been educated about what they need to do. They're educated. Their brain knows it, but their body is not trained sufficiently to be able to put that knowledge into action. So they need years of, maybe a
Yeah.
solid year of thousands and thousands of repetition of training to go with that education. So we have educational insights that we need to understand from the instructor, and then we have all these thousands of repetitions, physical behaviors that have to happen to develop that kind of mature, proficient skill set. So it's a good understanding when it comes to healing from trauma, childhood trauma stuff. Some of it is educational. We need to understand certain things, and then others are skills. So why is somebody abused as an adult, and when their parents are no longer there, they're not being abused by the parents anymore, but they're being in these unhealthy relationships. Well, in childhood, they were not taught the skills of self-care, of self-respect, of interpersonal self-advocacy and boundary setting. They didn't have those skills. And you can tell them that, and we can educate and have the insight, oh, I get
Yeah.
it. But then to develop those skills is really challenging, and it requires lots of repetition, lots of training, the same as it does on the martial arts mats.
So you'd spoken before. We mentioned it a couple of times that you're practicing in jujitsu and martial arts went in tandem right around the same time as your graduate studies. Where in your trajectory of career did you start thinking they're not just interconnected in ideas, practices, and discipline, but there are components or pieces of that discipline that I can move over and at what point do you start thinking, holy shit, I can infuse this into the clinical
Ah,
practice just as a mindset? When did that kind of connection take place?
I guess in my mind it was always there, but it was as I got, my own clients in psychology. Oftentimes I would just ask, "Are you into sports?" And oftentimes they'd really be into, like, say, football. Football is really big around here, so it's another combat sport, pretty much, so we would have that connection and we could use that as a means of explaining the same concepts. If you're developing a new skill, you don't want to try to learn a new skill and then go to the Super Bowl the next month. No, you have to develop it in training. You have to develop in the preseason games, fine tune it and then make it to the Super Bowl before you'd use it.
Yeah.
Well, if you're practicing boundary setting, you'd want to practice in a lot of easy ways before you practice boundary setting with somebody who very toxic, who abused you in the past or what have you. So it started at like that, and then through writing the book, I had a writing coach, and relied on her heavily to just help. It's the first book that I wrote, so relied on her heavily to help me understand, was it okay for me to do this? How does it work out here, And she said, absolutely. If you can make the connection and it makes sense and it's not going overly into the jiu-jitsu that people aren't interested in.
Yeah.
Then if it can serve as a useful tool to teach what you're really trying to teach, well, great. She kind of gave me permission to do that,
Awesome. Ernest, does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing? Not specifically, not that you knew you were going to end up having a practice or having a school of martial arts, but even personality wise, the type of kid you were, does it make sense in some way that this is what you're doing? How do you reconcile that?
Very much so, because oftentimes I still feel like a little kid because we're on the jiu-jitsu mats rolling around and roughhousing with each other, same as we were in elementary school.
Yeah.
And now I sit and have hours long conversation figuring stuff out, same as we did over drinks in college, So, I mean, it was, these are activities I was intensely into and really enjoyed. And so it's just, it does make a lot of sense. I love getting into it with somebody, and I love these physical activities. I love playing.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to put it, playing. Just essentially diving into the mud of life.
Yes. If you're not, we tell the parents when they bring their kids in, the parents oftentimes want to live through their kids. They push their kids. They want the kids to be the champion and all that stuff, And I said, like, if your kid is not leaving the mats with a smile on their face on a regular basis, they're just not going to want to come back, and they won't be in there long enough to develop that kind of skill set.
Yeah.
Before you tell them they need to be a champion, make sure they're having fun. And that's pretty difficult to do when you're talking about, childhood trauma and stuff like that. But when we go to develop how do we start to heal from it? It's best if we can get to a point where it's not necessarily playful and enjoyable, but the lifestyle of learning is enjoyable or very satisfying.
Yeah.
So it needs to be fun in that regard, or at least deeply satisfying, so that it's attractive and you want to just keep doing it.
Yeah. And you want to keep that habit going.
Yeah. We can't make therapy or coaching painful every time, so you dread going to it.
Yeah.
Dread going to the gym every time. It's probably best to go find a different activity, a different sport, a different group that's more attractive and fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. And then one more question before we jump into the books, Ernest. What does leadership mean to you? What does great leadership look like? What comes to mind?
Let's see. I guess the biggest parts of leadership, one would definitely be skill sets. To be an effective leader, you definitely have to have done enough work to develop skill sets that are of value to people. Along with the skill sets, you have to have the willingness to take on those responsibilities. This is a lot of people with tremendous skill sets who just are not comfortable with personal responsibility, and so they stay away from it. And there are a lot of people, and it's just difficult to find somebody who is willing to be personally accountable for both the good and the bad stuff, right?
Absolutely.
So I guess I'd say the skill sets, the willingness to take on personal responsibility. Yeah. And I'd say, I guess the last one would be maybe to be towards pro-social ends. So,
we don't want to assume everybody knows that. So let's just put it out there explicitly.
Yeah. There are a lot of very effective leaders who lead us into war or damage,
Yeah.
damage of the or
Yeah. I don't
effect
think that's
of
one that's ever come up in a response to that question, but you know what? Let's put it out there that that's what we mean.
excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Ernest, at this point, let's jump into the books. If you could, why don't you just give the titles to the two books that you want to cover, and then we'll dive into the first one and I'll throw you the
Okay.
questions and kind of break that one down.
So let's see. The first one would be my book. That one there. It's called "This Is How We Heal from Painful Childhoods: A Practical Guide for Healing Past Intergenerational Stress and Trauma." And uh, let's see. And just name the other book first, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The other book is called "Up from Slavery: An Autobiography by Booker T. Washington." Those are the two books. Yeah.
So why don't you give me, if you could, what an overview of your book and what led to your writing the book?
So let's see. An overview of my book would be: my book is intended to be a comprehensive overview of basically a curriculum for healing past trauma, childhood trauma. So if you've raised in an environment or you experienced prolonged periods of stress in childhood, there's a very normal set of symptoms and circumstances that happen. And I wanted to be able to list those and then have something to do for each of those variables involved. So it started out as 13, ran that for a while, ended up as 20. So basically, my book is a collection of 20 different variables that are very often seen in a family that experiences a lot of trauma. And we want to have an answer to each of those 20. So any one environment might have 17, 18, 19, or all 20 of them involved in that. So that my book really focuses on the individual person, but the individual person within the family unit. So I
What was
didn't really
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I,
No, go
I
ahead.
didn't really go into a lot of connection to ethnic groups or gender-based stuff. It's the individual being raised in this family that was raised by by the previous generation. I wanted to focus on that central unit to get started.
What was there a particular moment that you said or something that happened that triggered that, okay, now I got to write a book, or was it always lingering in your mind, or what was that moment where you're like, all right, I got to begin this, I got to get this out there?
It definitely started with what I explained a little while ago, just about having those clients come in and me realizing they had so much trauma in one family. That's what got me started on me just looking for the information out there. Let me look for a comprehensive, all these new therapists coming out. Somebody walks in with all this trauma. What do you say? What do you do? What do I say? What do I do? What's the most important thing to tend to? And I haven't I hadn't found anything at that point that had that curriculum for a young therapist or for individuals struggling with that. So that's what kind of got me started on it. And then, oh man, I guess about 6 or 7 years later, maybe 6 years later, I had those 13
Mhm.
points, and I ran that for a year or two, and it kept growing, grew up to 20. And once I had the 20, I kept running those 20 variables with clients for another couple of years. And at that point, I said, man, this is pretty fine tuned. At this point, it felt like I it was ready, and I wanted to share it with the greater population and with the literature, with the research out there. It's not a research book. It
Mhm.
hasn't gone through,
Peer
institutional
review
review
or
boards and all
yeah.
that stuff. No, not at all. It's not done that. It's got some research in it, but not research that I did. Just I'm a big fan of empirically validated treatments, and I'm a big fan of real science.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a
You're just
tremendous
based this is based on your experience, what you've seen, what's worked. No, I
yes,
appreciate you
yes,
sharing that and putting that out
yeah,
there. That's important.
yeah. Like
Um,
I kept learning all these individual ways to treat things, like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, um, somatic therapies, biofeedback, narrative therapies. I would learn these individual ones that each of those are empirically validated. Cognitive behavioral therapy, all those things, neuropsych assessment. I did all those trainings, and this is me trying to apply it to the average person walking in my room with a bunch of trauma history. How do I apply those things? Well, that's where I didn't have a comprehensive curriculum for that. That's what I believe I came up with.
So when it comes to your book, how do you, and the 20 components that you've spoken about, how do you lay it out? I mean, some books are of this nature are laid out if it's a treatment alphabetically, but how do you break it out? I mean, and that's not to mock them at all. It's just that's how
No,
they do it.
that was a
But for
very,
go ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah,
No, I
that's a
was just
very,
gonna say, just how do you lay it out for the reader? What can they find in terms of, are there sections of chapters? Are they just individual chapters? What's that path you lay out for your reader?
that was really challenging to put it in the right order. Yeah, because there's so many ways to approach it. And luckily, again, I had this Suzanne Squitanis was my editor, and it was my second editor. I had a negative one the first one. That was an unpleasant experience. Wasted a lot of time and money. And I got to her, and she was just tremendously helpful in figuring out what is the best way that the reader would be able to consume this. What is the most logical way to introduce it? So the way that it introduced, roughly the first, let's see, 11 of the rules, 11 out of 20, are a little more focused on self, on the individual. And then starting with 12, it goes more into the interpersonal and, the kind of microcosm world there, it's super clean like that, but it is mostly the first 11 are predominantly focused on self. And once we're getting a lot of stability there, 12 on is focusing on how are we interacting with the new me, with the rest of the world. And then within that, it starts like in a fairly logical way. Rule 1, thrive or survive, you decide. We're focusing on, what are we focusing on? We're not focusing on just surviving the world. We're focusing on thriving, on functioning at a very high level. Might be coming in right here. I want to finish at this high level.
Yeah.
The very next chapter is is to address the most common obstacles. So rule 2 and 3 address the most common obstacles that are put in our place from childhood. Chronic sympathetic survival mode, and narratives like the subconscious, what is keeping us stuck there. And then rule 4 starts right into, okay, well, what do we do about it? What do we do about these two obstacles? So rule 4 starts, what do we do about it? We must slow down to speed up. We have to slow down, remove ourselves from this fast-paced world and reacting, and start thinking, calm down, think, and have a game plan for how to move forward. And then it goes into a few more chapters of, what do I need to do? What skills and education do I need to develop? Healing requires training, education, empathy for all. Understanding good control. Control is good, especially good control.
Yeah.
So control, how do I control myself first? Then how do I control other people? That kind of like aggression. There's good aggression, there's bad aggression. There's good control, there's
Yeah.
bad control. How
Yeah.
can we
Tool
control
is just a
somebody
tool. It's all about what your intention is with it.
yeah.
Yeah.
How do you control children in a good way? Well, with a bunch of rewards for positive pro-social behaviors. Well, great. Okay. That's how you control in a positive way, through parenting kids or with a significant other,
Yep.
with positive rewards, what have you.
Okay.
So, and then let's see, what was next day? We got, just practicing great self-care. Let's see, 9 is practice treating yourself in a self-loving, self-respecting fashion. So people with a lot of childhood trauma most often have a very unhealthy internal voice. that's just eroding their confidence and constantly kind of when you're raised being told a lot of negative things all growing up, then it's just running in the background like on autopilot. It's just this constant subconscious conversation, and it's really challenging. So it's really challenging to do something about that. So that's its own rule there, where we have to learn how to treat myself in a self-loving and self-respecting fashion before I can demand other people do that.
Yeah.
So we have to do that to ourselves first. Next, we talk about the pendulum effect, which is most people swing between a little bit of, I get a little bit hungry and then I eat a little bit and then I'm a little full. But if I
Yeah.
wait until I'm
Yeah.
starving, then I go and I devour everything and I feel sick. And it is a big pendulum. And
Okay.
so we talk about that effect and what that means. And so these are all things that we're going to need to understand to gain insight into my own functioning.
Mm-hmm.
And then right at Rule 12, we get started with the interpersonal. Like Rule 12 is, it's us against trauma world. In trauma world, I define just as the cumulative effect of violence in the human species. So, when you're raised in violence or neglect or feeling isolated and alone, it feels like it's me against the world. How am I going to survive this world? So Rule 12 there starts the process of retraining the brain to change that mindset, change that belief. No, wait a minute, it is us.
Mm-hmm.
It's us against the traumas of the world. It's us against trauma world. So it's me and other people together. I'm not by myself. And that's a
Yeah.
really challenging one.
It's interesting just in talking to people here. It's amazing, first and foremost, how therapeutic this series has been for me. Just sharing
Awesome.
stories back and forth with people. I never thought I thought, if I'm being honest, I thought this would get my face out there. My good intentions, my good values as a coach,
Mhm.
right? That I'd meet great people, that I'd have good conversations, that I'd collect great interviews. But then, as soon as my curiosity got the best of me and I kept asking people more about their life, you realize like how much you have in common with people. And you realize how, even though you know it, you see the facade of somebody on Facebook and everything's put together and they just put out this book and they're a successful coach or whatever the guest may have been. It's amazing how, even though you know that's not all the case, that there's more behind it when you hear it in their voice, in their tone, what they go through, the ups and downs. It's amazing how that brings people together, how they can relate more. Like I appreciated you when I saw it up on LinkedIn, but I couldn't connect with you because I didn't know where we really connected. But then when you talk to somebody and you have that commonality, so it's amazing that you bring that up where it's not just me, because even with me and my own anxiety, in sharing it with other people that may have their own or not,
Mhm.
but I've found that speaking it out, sharing it, and realizing that there is this we and there is the trauma world, it's amazing how much of the burden that you feel is lifted off your back and shoulders just in sharing. Because I think at the worst points for me in my anxiety, it was very isolating.
Mhm.
You're not thinking about it, but you're sensing like, oh my God, it is just me, or I'm the one that's feeling this way. When you start comparing notes and opening up to other people and you bring that up, you realize how common it is. And just the fact that you realize that you're not alone, that it's not just you, that other people feel these sensations and you have people you can talk to about it. It's remarkable what that does for somebody when they come to that realization. Because that where I was going with that is like the most suffocating feeling of anxiety is feeling like you're the only one feeling whatever emotions you're feeling. It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, I guess the companionship or the connectivity to another human being, there is no substitute for that. When we talked earlier about getting some anger out, yeah, you can go punch the punching bag, and I feel much better, more exhausted after it, and that is
Mhm.
an effective start. And then it's amazing how much it dissipates once I share those thoughts with another human being.
Yeah.
Just the camaraderie, the awareness that I'm not alone in it, just sharing it alone, having another human being. We are so human. We are such social creatures, whether we like
Yeah.
it or not. That human contact or human connectivity, eye to eye contact, or little a hug or a handshake, it's in our DNA how much that interpersonal soothing is needed.
Yeah. And it put into play, just building on that, it put into play how when you share it, it's a relief. And it's a relief because you spend so much time trying to hold it in, trying to keep it together, trying to keep the package pretty or well kept, whatever it is. But it's
Yeah.
amazing how when you do express it and share it, there's a lot of your energy you get back because you don't have this subconscious programmed, self-programmed, society programmed need to disguise it. It's
Yes,
freeing. It's
yes.
freeing.
Yeah. And it's it's us against trauma world part is closely related to the next rule, which is secrets destroy.
Hmm.
All right. Just the toxic secrets we hold as a family destroy us. But the part that's specific to they needed to be separate rules because there was enough
Yeah.
meat to
Yeah.
each one that it needed to be itself. It's us against trauma world. Once I've shared some of these secrets and you don't suddenly turn in disgust away from me, when I share with you my fears and you're like, yeah, me too. I get anxious like that also. Suddenly there's that acceptance and just that acceptance of me, like, okay, I'm not an embarrassing, weak human being that you're going to run away from as soon as you realize that. No, you're
Mm.
experiencing the same thing. We're both fallible, vulnerable people.
Yeah.
Okay, so it is us together. So now we have a unity thing, a
Yep.
together thing that feels 1,000 times better than feeling isolated. Well, the next part
Absolutely.
conceptually, secrets destroy is this concept that now that I feel kind of connected to you, more connected to you, if I don't share some of my deep dark secrets, those things will still they still cause me some isolation, and I don't get corrective feedback from other people. If I have memories of my childhood stuff, my childhood brain made up stories about why it happened, what about the people who did it, or and what does it say about me, and all these things. So I have these stories that kind of set in my head, and then just accepted them. And if I don't share those thoughts with you, I don't share that secret with you, I cannot get corrective feedback from
Mm.
friends, family,
Yeah.
doctors. Just hearing. I mean, for example, one woman experienced this in childhood, a terrible fire that burned down the house, and in the midst of it, she was throwing a cup of water on it, and she just throughout all of her childhood and adult life, she never shared that because she was just so embarrassed. She was just so stupid. She's like, I'm so stupid for that. And just to explain, just for her to understand, now that she shared it, to understand, well, when we encounter intense fear, the thinking part of our brain shuts down. The blood draws away from it, is drawn away from it. You can see in thermal imaging the smart part of our brain just cool off. It turns blue, and the motor center turns bright red and orange from the
Yeah.
activity. So
Yeah.
you literally, like, when we panic, we drop about, I don't know, 20, 40 IQ points, and we do stupid stuff. So her just not sharing that experience prevented her from receiving in this medical information about biologically how the body
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
And it just totally changed that internal narrative, that negative inner critic she had of, oh, you're so stupid, so stupid. No, that's just what happens. That's
Yeah.
what happens. That's why they have
Yeah.
so much military training and police training where they have to get you wound up, get you scared, and then, drop bombs around you and beat you up and then make you perform. Because when we panic, everybody shuts down or does stupid stuff.
Yeah.
That's just how it
I mean,
works.
especially as a child. I mean, your
As
brain's
a
not
child
fully
with no
developed. I
training,
mean, yeah. Yeah.
how does a child get training of how to deal with neglect or violence or sexual, like it? They don't get training on how to deal with it. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's us against trauma world gives us that uh, shift in the mind from me in isolation to us together. It's a
Mhm.
collaborative thing, not a combative thing.
Yeah.
And then Secrets Destroy pushes us to say, okay, anything that I'm feel shame around is probably best to put on the table to discuss with safe, you know, appropriate people, so that that is no longer a thing that is hidden that I don't want people to know about.
Yep.
It's something that I've fleshed it out. I've purged it of some of that toxicity and the shame, purge of that, learn what we can from it, and then we can move more freely forward.
Okay. Is that was that all the
Let's see, that's 13. Number 14 has to do with boundaries. Boundaries are confusing. So just practice
Mhm.
better boundaries. When raised in traumatic in dysfunctional environments, the boundaries are often so out there. I mean, abuse alone is terrible boundaries. So we learn what are boundaries, what are some ways that we can start improving and start practicing them. I don't say practice perfect boundaries because that's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just always challenging. So let's just keep practicing better. Let's just keep getting better at cognitive boundaries, at our thinking boundaries, keep getting better at physical boundaries and emotional boundaries. So that's 14. Number 15, first is called center of the universe is not a compliment. So this is in families with a lot of trauma and dysfunction. Uh, all the individual people are kind of like planets revolving around the center of the universe, which is usually
Mhm.
the most violent or the most dysfunctional, the most manipulative or the biggest victim, the person who's figured out how to make everybody revolve around them. Uh, it's often apparent, but not always.
Yeah.
So the center of the universe, that's a chaotic method of everybody trying to revolve around this sick individual. And the alternative to that, there are many alternatives to it, but the one that's kind of, I guess, the most normal for our Western civilization is to call it like the ideal family unit, where there are two individuals who come together, and these two individuals are a team,
Mhm.
and they work as a team for the betterment of the children who are on the next level. So they work as a singular unit. They separate from their family of origin. They come together and they create this household where they're a team. They
Mhm.
create the rules and regulations for the kids, and that's basically it. Shoot straight forward. So they they function according to that model and according to those rules, not according to the whims of an individual person. So it really shifts, kind of like rule one. What do I want to do to thrive in the world? Well, this one has center universes. What do we need to do to function as a family unit in the interpersonal in that realm?
Gotcha.
So ideal family. Yep. Uh, next is a huge um, obstacle to that ideal family diagram is overindulgent dynamics. Overindulgent dynamics are bad, period. So we have overindulgent parenting. That might be considered like uh, permissive parenting, authoritarian parenting, or neglectful parenting. Those are overindulgent parenting styles. There's also overindulgent relationship stuff like what do you call it? In the addiction realm where people are codependent, that'd be an example of overindulgent dynamics. And
Okay.
overindulgent dynamics refers to if I'm a people pleaser, and I am somewhat of a people pleaser, so I identify really strongly with this one. If I love someone or I adore somebody and I want them to be happy and I prove my worth to them. I I prove my value to them by overindulging them, by
Mhm.
removing the natural consequences of their negative behaviors, by doing things for them. Uh, basically, I'll do whatever it takes and say whatever it takes to try to put a smile on that person as fast as I can, even
Yeah.
if those things are very unhealthy. Even if I'm saying a bunch of lies and I'm doing things that are unhealthy or do not help that person, I just can't stand their emotional. distress, and so I have to try to fix it. So when you have a parent whose kid is at the store and he wants a candy bar right before dinner, oh no, we can't have a candy bar before dinner. That's not healthy. That'll set you up for an unhealthy lifestyle.
Mm.
The kid starts crocodile tears, starts crying and throwing a tantrum, and the parent sees that, and if they're a very overindulging parent, they cannot handle seeing their child crying, even though
Yeah.
the child might be fake crying, but they cannot help that. They cannot handle that. And so they do something unhealthy. They purchase the bar so that the kid will have a smile on their face.
Yeah.
Overindulgent dynamics are very unhealthy. Prevents the kid from learning really, truly functionally healthy, thriving practices and skills. So that has to do with overindulgent dynamics. The next chapter is Rule 17: addictions equal intimacy disorders. So uh, wherever there's a lot of trauma and violence and isolation, there's a lot of addiction. So when we have these, food addiction is a huge one. There's a really big, in other words, when the interpersonal functioning as a child goes poorly, and the parents are not very effectively teaching a child how to self-soothe, as well as offering them other person soothing. They need something to help them soothe themselves, their emotions.
Yeah.
So it goes to other things, like just loving pets and whatnot, having a pet. I have 1,000 cats or whatever, the cat lady, that sort of thing, or alcohol, drugs is very enticing, shopping addiction, addictions to these non-interpersonal things, because the interpersonal is not healthy or successful. So we look not at the getting sober part, but once you're sober, how do you become a really healthy, thriving, sober living person?
Yeah.
You can be a dry drunk. You can just stop drinking, and 10 years later, you're a miserable, dry, isolated drunk. You're a dry drunk. And so the next thing is addressing those intimacy disorders, so that we have we like to have so many engaging relationships that we don't have time to get lost in vices, because it would take away from the wonderful fun of being engaged with other human beings. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
So then after addictions, we have Rule 18 is will versus skill. Both are necessary. So this speaks to the understanding that I can have a tremendous will to be a great parent, but if I wasn't taught how to be a great parent, and I just don't have the skills, then how am I going
Yeah.
to do that? How am I going to just intuitively do that? You can't. So we need to develop those skills. And then some people have the skills, it seems, and they just don't have the desire. They don't apply themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to look at the people in our lives and just be able to analyze, like objective, kind of assess, where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? Where am I skilled? Do I need to work on communication, conflict resolution? Do I need to work on self-care? What do I need to work on? Where am I on the scale from, victim and unhealthy to thriving, healthy, stable? Where am I along that thriving scale? And where is my brother? Where's my significant other? Where's my sister?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a kind of an objective, kind of scientific evaluation of the people in my life. Where are they on that skill level, and where are they on the ambition to improve or do something about that? In general, we're going to thrive best when we surround ourselves by people who are very skilled and who have the desire to apply those skills,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's oftentimes very uncomfortable, because we tend to stick with what's familiar to us. So,
Yeah.
if I'm
Oh yeah.
raised in chaos, I tend to be attracted to or duplicate chaos. So
Yeah, because separating from that before you have something else established, you'd be alone. You know
yeah,
what I mean? And that just
right,
triggers one's fears as being isolated. So they're like, okay, what's worse? What I'm dealing
yeah,
with now, what I've known all my life, or going off on my own to explore to find something more productive, positive, reinforcing?
So we got the will versus skill, both are necessary. And then the last two, Rule 19 needed to be its own. Again, it's not a contest. Trauma is just bad and sad. This was both for the individual and interpersonally. Had to be its own rule. A lot of times, you know, a lot of people say, well, I didn't experience big T terrible trauma, so I'll just keep my mouth shut. My traumas or my struggles are not valid or
As
important enough to it as my spouse, what
yeah,
have you. And so we can get in this really unhealthy self-devaluing or self-uncaring, self-disrespecting behavior of dismissing our own personal stuff. And then it can also get into this contest on the other side of it with a spouse where I either keep quiet or say, that's nothing. That's nothing compared to the stuff I went through. So I can
yeah,
be invalidating toward others. And we just really don't want to do either of those. It's not a contest. Once we understand that trauma is just bad, trauma breaks things down, and the damage from it is very sad. It's just sad. So once we accept that trauma is just bad and sad, then we can agree to together do something about it. We can grieve the loss of what needs to be grieved, and we can do the training that we can do, educating to make ourselves less vulnerable to it in the future. And we do that by helping each other out, but not by telling each other that doesn't count. That's not a
yeah.
big T trauma. That doesn't. No. And then the final rule is to make it normal. Make it normal. And this has to do with with the skills acquisition. Once you've, like, if we go back to the martial arts, once you learn decent striking skills, you can forget those or get out of practice. So we have to just make
Mhm.
it normal. Make it a normal part of your life. Make it a normal part of your learning. Make it a normal part of repetition, a very positive part of your life. Make all these things normal. Make all these new skills that you developed over 2, 3, 4, 5 years of heavy therapy. Make it normal for the rest of your life. To hang out with people with high skill levels. Make it normal to set healthy boundaries. Make it normal to improve how you love yourself and respect yourself, and keep making these things normal. So it's speaking very specifically to that difficulty of creating a new normal. Again, we're very attracted. Our bodies as things become stressful, we tend to gravitate toward what was happened prior. We kind of regress. We go back to go back to the vices, go back to the addictions, go back to the
Mhm.
isolation, go back to the self hate or self disgust, or go back to those things in moments of new difficulties. Or yeah, so we want to practice making it normal, all these new things. And in general,
Ernest,
this goal is for it to be so normal for me that the next generation is just raising that.
yeah,
So there's that
yeah,
upward mobility intergenerationally. That's a
yeah.
really
That's
exciting thing.
that's come up on here also as well as just the ability to break those generational trauma chains that it can shift so much. If one generation can stop it, knows enough, has the wherewithal, is aware enough to see it, do something about it,
Mm-hmm.
they can shift their behavior towards that next generation. So that's powerful stuff. Ernest, for you in writing this book, was there anything that evolved in you, changed in your thinking, where you may have had aha moments, anything at all in the process of putting this book out? I mean, even aside from the challenges of
Yeah.
writing and rewriting this and that, but any of your thinking on the topic itself, on the topics, on the exercises, was there anything that
Yeah.
shifted because of the just the regular practice of diving into this book and putting it together and out there?
Absolutely. I, it was several years into it. It's not a contest was one of the ones that got added later on, and mainly added because there was a few couples that came in that were particularly contentious, and it took a while for them to get that. And but then I found myself applying that because I guess I had this somewhat of a memory and a general experience of my childhood as just like almost fairy tale like. I remember, my father going off to, addiction recovery when I was 10. So I knew that that was the case, but I guess I put some rose colored glasses on for all that. And it was just a childhood of playing in the back neighborhoods and hunting and fishing with my dad and doing all these wonderful things and big giant breakfasts with my mom for all the neighborhood kids. I mean, it really was a wonderful childhood that was healthy enough, and a lot of strength in our education and work ethic and all those things. And so while I like to practice what I preach at all times, I do my best to do that. It was almost like I did not apply a lot of these rules to myself because I wasn't giving myself permission to do so.
Mm.
And when I started encountering some rough life circumstances in my middle age, like just 5, 6, 8 years ago, uh, I started to say, you know what, that I want to more focused apply these rules to me very specifically, and give myself the permission to address my little T traumas and my things that kind of rework a lot of my childhood stuff. Why am I attracted to mischievous or intense things? Why am I?
Hmm.
Maybe that's tied into some stuff. Why do I? Why? So started opening up that can, and wow, okay, it did become increasingly fruitful. And then what was the other one? Oh, uh, man, let's see, about what was that, 6 years ago? I just was basically fell prey to this con artist. It's a long story, but it was really traumatizing. It was for me as an adult, and
Hmm.
so it was a most challenging, most it just kept. It was just for so much legal and financial entanglement. It was years, and because it was so intense, I really ran through the rules and was practicing it myself. Anger begets anger, violence begets violence, and love begets love. And I skipped that one when we were discussing it. That's let's see, what is that? Rule number 10, when we're still focusing on the individual while learning to process and heal from things. There's just there's naturally almost has to be a great deal of anger there for people who are raised in these environments. So we have to have some means of guiding that. So that rule, anger begets anger, violence begets violence, and love begets love, was tremendously helpful for me. That would run through my head dozens and 100 times a day for a year, to not give in to the anger, to not just fall into it and allow it to consume.
Yeah.
It's and so it really
Do you share
connected me
that in the
to it
book, that experience, Ernest?
very briefly, because
Okay.
I
Because I
have
feel
this
it's
thing
always
where
great to hear from somebody who's a specialist in an area, whether it's a coach, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a doctor. Um, it's always great for me to hear that even though they're a specialist in their field, and they're passionate about what they practice, they're passionate about what they've written and published and put out there. It's always, I guess, comforting in a way to me, and I appreciate it when any one of those fields, coach, therapist, doctor, whoever, shares that they themselves need the work too, go through the work, they practice what they preach, that it doesn't
yeah,
lessen their quality as a caretaker of any kind because they themselves do the work. They're just the specialists. They're the most familiar with it. They're probably the most curious in that field. But I like when
yeah,
somebody can share, I've had my own stuff too, and I've done the work and am doing the work. So I appreciate you sharing that.
yeah. I yeah, it was. I hear what you're saying, and when I was writing the book, again, Suzanne, my editor, she encouraged me to include enough of my jujitsu stuff as long as it's helpful, because I tend to be very stiff in my boundaries, very strict in my boundaries. I want people to know this information because the information is so important. And she just kept reminding me, yeah, but people don't want to hear it from a robot. They want to kind
Mm,
of speaking directly to what you're saying.
Yeah.
What makes them trust you? Why? Well, I have these expertise. Okay, well, that's nice to have the expertise. That soothes a lot of readers. Like, okay, he has these expertise, 25 years, doctorate of clinical psychology. That's fine. Good. Now I'll buy it because because he has his doctorate.
Yeah.
And then other people like, yeah, so there's lots of PhDs out there, lots of MDs. Are you a real person? Do you
Yeah.
practice what you preach? Do you have personal integrity? It's like, oh, okay, well, if you do, but they have to know you a little bit
Yeah.
to be
Agreed.
able to evaluate that. So, and while I was writing it, it was actively happening. A lot of my adult struggles. So uh, that's I have a list of potential future books, and that might be one of them because it was just so challenging for me. But
Yeah.
the other part of it that was very connecting to this book, to my material in it, was to experience, the court cases. I don't know if you've ever been a court case, but my goodness, none of them seem to resolve in under 3 years. I've
Yeah.
worked as a psychologist. I worked with a lot of people who were in these legal cases, and so I would work with them for it almost was never less than 2.5 years. It was almost always between 3 and 4 years. And some of them were in cases that were like 15 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I helped them with dealing with the psychological ramifications of repercussions of these prolonged combative scenarios where they felt very unjustly persecuted, rightfully so. I mean, just I felt so bad for them. Well, when suddenly I was the one who I know that I was innocent of A, B, and C. I know this,
Yeah. Yeah.
but there's this constant legal pressure that goes for years. It was unreal. So it was just this understanding like you can't get away from it. You have to play this game, and it's the least fun game. The legal American legal system is like the least fun game you can play, but you
Yeah.
have to play it, and you have to play by their rules, and you have to just shut your mouth and go along with it. And so the emotion that comes from that, it was so connecting for me with my clients to think like this is what they were raised in. They were raised in environments in which they had very little voice. They had to
Mhm.
follow somebody else's rules, their crazy rules for years and years. They had no say in it. Too bad. Just get by and deal with it.
Yeah.
It's like, man, and that's what you were raised in? At least I
Yeah,
have family
that
and
was your
friends.
experience, but then you had your family life to come home to. You had a release, you had
Exactly.
a yeah, you had
I,
an escape from that, where
I had
theirs
best
was
case
just
scenario.
yeah,
Yeah. And I have these clients and who don't have that. Like I have so many. One of my first clients at that college, she came in and she said, "Hey, I was just like basically excommunicated, what do they call it, from her religious cult." And she was now none of her family or friends or people that she grew up with were allowed to speak to her.
yeah,
So she was very suddenly very alone in the world and going and put herself in college. And she just came in and said, "I need you to help me learn how normal people think and to make some
yeah,
friends."
yeah,
And it's like, wow, what a different experience than I have of I'm experiencing this as an adult and I have these people, these wonderful, stable people to go to.
yeah,
And I was struggling tremendously psychologically and emotionally from this.
yeah,
So that was very connecting to the book. And I certainly ran myself through the rules. They were very helpful, leaned heavily on my friends and family. Uh, yeah, to try to fight the desire to become a recluse and all that.
yeah. I can only imagine. So Ernest, what do you imagine? Just briefly, general ideas, if any. What do you imagine for your next writing? And I know this book is very young in its own tenure, but what do you think for your writing? Where do you want to go in the future?
I think uh, a great companion book to this would be like an expanded workbook with additional resources,
Hmm.
just to help drill in, to get help. Each of the concepts, it's really dense, right? So it's 272 pages, 20 rules. I did not put a lot of fluff in there. There's not a lot of rambling on. It's pretty to the point and concise.
Yeah,
So a companion book, I think, would be helpful. A number of people said, "Yeah, please do. That would be helpful." Along with the companion book could be workbook style with additional um, workbook things to do, as well as additional just case studies to drive home the point, to understand the concepts at another level. So a companion workbook for this one would be one possibility. Uh, uh, Again, kind of going through a few different ideas on how to potentially present the things I went through as it relates to these things.
Yeah.
Let's see, and then there were a few other kind of part twos to it, sort of thing.
Gotcha.
You know.
And then Ernest, I've kept you long enough, but why don't we go through that second book briefly? The Booker T. Washington book, his autobiography, Up from Slavery.
Yes.
So when we got to talking about you coming out here, what was it that stood out about this book that wanted, usually people are like, I got a book out, I want to talk about my book. What was
Yeah.
it that made you say, okay, I got my book out, I want to talk about my book, but there's this other book as well that stands out as impactful to me?
Yeah, two things: the man himself, and then what he did. Are the two separate things. Booker T. Washington himself. I mean, I think I truly believe, as far as all things considered in history of America, I think it'd be really hard fought to find another human being who put his life to a better service to improve the United States of America more than Booker T. Washington. I can't think of anyone who devoted more of his life more successfully, more thoroughly, in such an intelligent and effective way than him. I don't think there's a better example of a real American out there in history.
Yeah.
That's how much he blows me away with what he did. And what he did is directly related to my book, in the sense that, my book, This Is How We Heal. This is how we, as an individual, as a person, and as a society, heal from painful childhood trauma stuff. It's a guidebook for 20 rules that help the individual and the family unit set up a very strong household of skills that then positively impacts the community. Okay. So individual, right. Well, here's Booker T. Washington, who's doing a similar concept, but right after the Civil War, where slavery was abolished. So here's a man at this crazy point in time who was born a slave until he was like 9 years old or 10 years old, became free. And what did he choose to do with his new freedom? Was to create a curriculum for thriving for Black people then, and race relations to be moving a very positive, together direction. I mean, it was just and I read this probably 80. I was 80% through writing the book, and I was working on editing it and whatnot when I read it, and it just blew me away. It just blew me away, because this is what I focused on so much, the individual unit. If I had read his curriculum, it might have shaved off a couple of years of my of mine, because I'm like, just amazing. And again, I'm
So
from the Deep South, and I love the Deep South. I'm from South Louisiana, but man, we got a lot of negative stuff here. And I went out to California, and they're like,
different world.
different world. And I
Then
went
you
out to
came to New
the
York
East
and
Coast. Exactly. I come back down south, and we think a lot different here. So it's this topic that he took of how do you what is the best curriculum for the individual to definitely thrive in this newfound freedom? How can they thrive in that environment? Not just survive, because up to that point they were not allowed to thrive. They were only allowed to survive.
yeah.
Well, all of a sudden you're allowed to thrive within reason, to a degree,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
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 You're allowed to thrive, and how do you do that? And his curriculum, pretty straightforward, was first, we have to study the basics. About 80% of what he advocated was studying the basics. Like, how do I take care of my body with grooming and food and work? And, like, how do I take care of my body? How do I take care of my household, keep it up, maintain it, build it, etc.? How do I develop a skill set that is useful to the community so that they'll need me and I'll have an income? So he started with that individual self-care, family care, household care, building constructive to the community that also is feeding my family. It's a two-way, mutually
Yeah.
beneficial relationship. And then after that, on that level, then he said, then there's a whole nother layer of that. Like that could just be by itself. That's basically what my book does for the individual who's experienced trauma. What do we do to construct a thriving household?
Yeah.
But then he had the added ridiculous challenge of having to consider race relations right after the slavery was ended. So, oh my goodness. And there were these kind of competing camps at the time. One was we have to go to Washington and advocate for more legislation and money, et cetera. So we need to advocate for this political, like politics is going to resolve this and make everybody
Yeah.
thrive. And
Yeah.
then Booker T was in the other camp, which was, well, we were not allowed to learn a bunch of skills. Now we need to learn those skills. So let's spend all of our time, all week and all month and all these years for decades, just learning all these fundamental skills that will guarantee that we thrive. And then when it came to the race relations, his curriculum for that was, look, we don't have to intermingle exactly right now all the way. Let's just make sure that each person can thrive in their own environment, and then we can work together in a successful way, in a mutually beneficial, successful way. And then, the social mingling might come later, whatever. But his curriculum was, it's almost like it just sounds too logical. and
Yeah.
But how can you? It's hard for me to find an argument against that.
Yeah, it's amazing that he survived the trauma that he's writing about and has like the wherewithal, the composure to then write about it and come up with a plan about it or for it to move forward. That to me is mind blowing that somebody could have that composure after everything that's been suffered for generations. And he's 9 when it's ended. Well,
Yeah,
that part of it. Um, yeah, it's just incredible. So is it kind of
it
like the
is incredible. Huh?
prologue? Is it kind of like the prologue of a brief history of what's happened and then I don't know, chapters? Is it in a memoir
Yeah,
form? Like how's it structured,
it
Ernest?
it is in a memoir form, but I will say, I mean, just it is mind blowing to me. What you just said. I mean, who can do that? But in the way he describes it, his mindset in it is, uh, that the opening line in my at the introduction for my book is, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The next best time is today. It's an old Chinese
Yeah.
proverb. And
Yep.
when people come into doing trauma work, they often come in their 30s and 40s or 60s. They're like, man, I really wish I'd done this trauma work a long time ago. And like, yeah, well, the best time to plant a tree was been 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And and Booker T describes a similar thinking process of, we've spent all this time in a system that we know is immoral and corrupting and terrible. Let's not waste any more time, not a single flipping moment, wasting time on delving into it or pointing fingers or figuring.
Or going
He
to
didn't want,
Washington thinking that policymakers are going to fix it. He's like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. He wanted to focus. He didn't want to waste a single mother second. He wanted to look forward and see there's just too much work to do. Let's get to work.
yeah,
And there's just and then he lived his life like that. So somehow, like, I mean, he must have had, I don't know, a wonderful, and he does speak about, his mom and being constructive and all that. And uh, so it is written in memoir form. It's chapter by chapter. There's a little bit of a setup just of what was going on at the time.
Mhm.
And he just walks through how he as a child had access to learning environments, and he had to work really hard for it. I mean, like crazy stuff, like he had enough money to get like halfway to the school, but he left the house. I'm like, so you're traveling however many hundreds of miles. It was
Oh
back
yeah.
in 1862 or 1868 or something, and you're going to leave the household by yourself with half the money to get there. How you
Yeah.
like that kind of crazy? He was really driven to uh, to get that knowledge. He loved learning, as did so many people there that were. And so he gained access to. It goes through in the number of chapters that process of him gaining that education, demonstrating to the principals of the people, the like his mentors, the
Yep.
president of these colleges, how he was like this, just intellectual powerhouse. I mean, he's clearly probably a genius, level thinker. I mean, he's very intelligent, hard work. And so he distinguished himself. And so they asked him to lead up the growth of the Tuskegee Institute, uh, in the deep South, right?
Hmm.
Uh, is that Alabama? Yeah, Alabama. And so when he got there, there was like an old rundown, what do you call it? A farm or something like that, like an old barn.
Yeah.
So they were really starting with the name and not much more than the name and a little bit of land. And throughout his span there of him running the show there, he developed the curriculum. The students started doing the curriculum. For example, he said part of the curriculum has to be learning how to build bricks, how to make bricks, and how to build buildings, so that the students would spend essentially his formula was roughly 80% of the day learning those basics and learning those things. And then after you've done your basic work, your fundamentals, the last 20%, if you still got the energy in the day after working for 10 hours, you could go and do another hour or two of learning the fancy stuff,
Yeah.
which is like learning French, learning Latin, learning, oration and politics and all the fancy stuff. Right. So everyone who graduated from there knew how to create bricks, build buildings, and plant and grow food. They were self-sustaining. They learned how to plant, to farm, and they learned how to. Then they were experimenting. It was a school of learning. It's like they learned how to plant like something like 3 times more potatoes per plot than anybody else around. So their graduates were in tremendous demand.
Yeah.
The other farmers and plantation owners and like they needed that knowledge. And so everybody who graduated had a functional skill set that would guarantee them work. Right. And so through these decades, they kept building all these buildings. So the Tuskegee Institute was just, I forgot the numbers, but by the time he retired or passed away, it was like, 30 something buildings. And, uh, in that process, he also started traveling and speaking. So he was invited all over the world to speak with all these people. Uh, he dined with princes and queens and whatnot,
Wow.
throughout the world, because there was, at the time, there was this, I mean, this was right after the Civil War ended, right? So there was this huge problem of what do we do? How do we heal from this? What do we do with, I forgot what they termed it, the black problem or whatever. So he was on this tour advocating and trying to raise money for his institute, which was very successful at doing it. And in fact, I believe his autobiography, this memoir that he wrote, it seems to be part memoir and part of it seems to be a marketing tool for himself,
Mm.
where he goes in and expresses appreciation for these very wealthy donors who donated tons of money for him to improve the Tuskegee Institute and teach more of his curriculum to the black population there. So it was like, man, that's the multi-level genius this guy was, who not only lived in it and worked it, but he also understood the system and was able to thrive such that he's eating with, you know, eating with presidents and prime ministers and getting checks cut to him from the wealthiest in the world to teach
That's
these
just incredible. I
fundamentals
mean,
that
it's,
prepare.
you know, it's the whole nature, nurture, what were
Yeah.
your circumstances? You know, we're all enslaved, you know, across the country, or, you know, more in the South, and the shift in the divide between the North and the South. In the
Mhm.
South, you know, wherever he was, they were all in the same circumstances. And then what is it about you that makes you rise up, see things so clearly?
Man.
It's just incredible. It's incredible how one person can rise up from those circumstances, again, that were just similar across so many, um, to come up with something like that. Yeah, I mean, ahead of his time is just an understatement in terms
Yeah.
of coming up with the lessons, writing down the lessons, saying here's the manual, like this is the way we have to do it. We can't depend on people in Washington. We know A, where most of them may stand. We know B, how slow things
Mhm.
function. Let's just take all
Yeah.
the resources instead of waiting for somebody to come save us in that next level of us just moving forward. Let's just do it
Yeah.
ourselves. It's just incredible. Ernest, what kind of lessons do you think
Mm.
people can take from Booker T's Washington's book to now?
Mm.
I mean, there's
Oh,
always some kind of lesson you can draw out. What do you think are the biggest lessons that stand out that anyone today can take away from his writings?
I mean, I would say his formula for success and for healing, I believe 100% it applies today. That, uh, if we continue to focus more, we would update the curriculum, so kids in school would learn, hygiene, learn homekeeping, learn these things. In high school, they would learn some trade along with the fancy stuff,
Mhm.
and then also, um, I was going with that. Yeah, so they would, along with some like psychology, and nowadays some of the fundamentals would be basic computer literacy and things like that. So we would need to update the curriculum so that upon graduating high school, every single kid will know a trade that they can get a a job where they can feel like good about.
Yeah.
So Booker T. One part that I haven't mentioned is that Booker T. talks a lot about the dignity of work, because when you think about it, it was this weird, unhealthy relationship during slavery where basically white people are too good to work, so they didn't know how to actually work, and then the black folk were forced to work, so work sucks. They have this idea that work sucks, and then white people have the idea that work sucks. So part of the curriculum for Booker T was to say there is a tremendous amount of dignity in work. That you can feel proud at the end of a
Yeah.
day and at the end of a month that you've created these things and created an income and created, you know, uh, built things. So the pride and dignity in that work. We like I said, I grew up in almost all through academia. My family's really big in academia, and even there was a bit of an elitist where it's like, oh, the trades are this, and you
Mhm.
got to get your PhD or become a big hot doctor or MD or something like somehow that's better than. Well, what if in high school everyone is finishes high school with a trade that they can go out and feel
Yeah.
dignified and good about contributing and earning good money. And then
Yeah.
if they want to do the fancy stuff and the other kind of higher level, that requires another 10 years of academics, great, go do that. But
Agreed,
it's
because
an
that
attitude
that
change.
that kind of follows that paradigm of him saying, "Why are you going to Washington?
Mhm.
You know, where like the white collars are, where like the
Yep.
power
Yep.
is, you know, the elitists, whatever you want to say. Why are you
Mhm.
going all the way there when we can stay here, gather our resources, and do the thing, whatever it may be?" That's kind of
Yeah.
like that. It's like, why are you going far off in the distance when there are tools, when there is knowledge that we can utilize here at this point, say high school, and do those things now, hit the ground running instead of waiting off in the distance. Again, I have a few master's degrees. I love education more than most people, more than anyone. I kept going back
Uh-huh.
until they told me I couldn't come back. But there is something to be said about yeah, that dignity, that pride. Because I know people that have gone to school and gone to school and gone to school, and they don't deliver, or they're not happy, or they don't have pride in what they're doing or what they achieved. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's not cookie cutter that Washington's going to get it done. It's not cookie cutter that a
No.
degree is going to get it done for you. So I think those are
Yeah.
very valid points and considerations.
Uh, that does bring up another thing that I really identified with a great deal with between his book and mine, just that curriculum part, which is, the route of going to Washington and trying to get legislation passed is it goes with people's impatience in general. I want this problem resolved now. I
Yeah.
want it resolved immediately. We want, whatever you want to call it, how do we get to being equal as quickly as possible? Well, we pass a law. Well, now we're equal.
Yeah.
No, there's a tremendous amount of education and training
Hmm.
that is required on both sides of the equation to,
It's not just freedom, but it's what you do with that freedom.
and that's, and Booker T was clear that in order to truly experience the benefits of freedom, you don't just suddenly enjoy it. To enjoy it, we must do these things: educate
Hmm.
ourselves, have an income from a good day's work. Like that's experiencing the benefit, the wonderful aspects of freedom. So it's work. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
you know. And what I appreciated in him is that his what he do is decades and decades of really hard work, and he's teaching these students. I mean, they would work like 12 hours a day, and then I mean it was intense. And people were lined up. You had to. It was hard to get into the college, into the institute. There were so many people that wanted it, even though the curriculum was so very challenging. Like that many people wanted that bad. That's phenomenal. But it's people want it really fast, but unfortunately, it takes a long time. We don't
Yeah.
heal from slavery in one generation. We can't even heal from intergenerational trauma within one family in one generation. We can do a tremendous amount if we do decades of really focused
Hmm.
learning. But
Hmm.
that learning is a teacher standing in front of some kids and teaching them a bunch of stuff. And people are like, well, that's too slow. We need something faster. And there is nothing faster.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are 20 variables in my book. There are 20 variables. If you don't know how to do one of them, it'll throw the whole it can throw your entire environment off. And so we have to slow down to speed up. We slow down, learn a bunch of skills. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of, like we were doing right now, it takes a lot of 2-hour conversations before you learn enough and before you understand you're given this information to be successful out there.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of work that has to be done. And
Yeah. And
Booker
the
T was
important
not afraid
part,
of work.
which you've outlined, is starting today, is getting started, is baby steps. It can be,
Yeah.
1% a day, 1% a week. It's just a matter of heading in that right direction. Sometimes it's going to be tough work. Sometimes it's going to be tough conversations. Sometimes it's going to be
Yeah.
tough circumstances. But as long as you keep heading in that direction, especially if you can build a community of just a few people that have that desire to work in a better direction, even if
Mhm.
it's not perfectly designed, but they know we want better. Let's work off each
Yeah.
other. Let's work with each other to see what that better direction looks like. Instead of, because some
Yeah.
people won't hit the button, they won't pull the trigger until it's perfect and we figured out exactly what it is we want.
Exactly.
In
Yep.
some circumstances, okay, that does work, in developing a business and whatnot. But when it's huge like that, when it's societal like that, it's not going to be a perfectly defined path. It takes give and take. Look how many
Yeah.
regions there are in the country with different histories, different ideas now.
Mhm.
So, but as long as we start those conversations of learning, such as this one and beyond, I mean that's what it takes. But it's always about, I've learned, you can't wait until something is perfect to launch it. Like you have to just do it
Oh,
incremental steps, trial and error of experimentation.
yeah. And in that experimentation, there's you and me, there's a community, and modern day now, we have so much with the online stuff and with the way the media generally is. There's so much contention.
Yeah.
There's so much taboo.
Yeah.
There's so much that it's hard to discuss things politically, and
Oh, yeah.
especially online because a lot of companies are they make more money the more contentious something is,
Yeah.
and imagine that it has to have been a similar environment right after slavery ended, right? A hugely contentious environment in which we're trying to reestablish all these new roles between the race. I mean, what an amazingly, it must have been an unbelievably contentious time frame. And what was Booker T's attitude toward it? Basically, let's not waste another moment in negativity because there's too much
Yeah.
obvious positive work that we can do together.
Yeah.
We'll get the details later. We'll find out the fine-tuned details a little later. There's too much work that we need to help one another with right now. Let's put
Yeah.
our nose to the books, put our you know uh, shovels in the garden and get to work.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
after we've done a bunch of work, and after we're making money and surviving and not doing better than just surviving, and after we're proud of our home, it's such a different conversation we'll have about race relations and things when
Yeah. I mean, it's always incredible
we've
when
done
people
that work.
they want to put up some kind of structure, a metaphorical structure, but they haven't laid out a proper foundation to it.
Yeah,
We're impatient. We want the success. We want the materialization. We want the result, but we're so impatient. We don't lay out the proper foundation and build the right way.
yeah.
Ernest, in wrapping up, what are you up to these days? Is there anything that you want to share? Anything I haven't
Oh,
asked? Anything that you want to share? The floor is yours to
oh,
just put out there whatever I might not have covered that you
yeah.
want to put out there now.
Let's see. Well, the most direct, I'd love for every listener to buy my book. This is How We Heal from Painful Childhoods. It's available on Amazon. You can go to healfromchildhood.com to read a little bit more about it. Uh, that's for the book. And once you read the book and you have some questions about it, I do offer online life coaching services and trauma coaching services. So that's my favorite, is to work with people on applying these rules and concepts to thrive in their personal life and in their family environment. Uh, that website is ernestellenderphd.com. Uh, yeah, so book, healfromchildhood.com, my life coaching services, ernestellenderphd.com. Yeah, that's about it. If you're in town and you're martial artist, come swing by my gym and get some jujitsu rolling on. Yeah.
That's amazing. And again, we covered two books with Ernest. First, his own book, This Is How We Heal from Painful Childhoods, a practical guide for healing past intergenerational stress and trauma. And then second, Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up from Slavery. Ernest, thank you so much for taking this time and just talking martial arts and psychology and just everything that has to do with stress, intergenerational or other trauma. This is just so much of that has come up in all these episodes, people working through this, big trauma, little trauma,
Mhm.
disruptions, whatever it may be. That's why after that kind of theme came up in certain episodes, that's why I started introducing that question about people's childhoods, because I was
Yeah.
curious about who they are now versus who they were then. What did they bring forward? How do they see the inner child in the work that they're doing? Because I just think it just sets the stage for so much. So I appreciate that came up in our conversation. Thank you for sitting down for this.
Oh man, thank you again for the invite, man. This is really wonderful. This is really fun.
I appreciate that. And if there's anything that I might have missed, usually I say we're limited on time, but we did go 2 hours. But there is so much that I could ask Ernest. If there's anything that you think I could have asked, please reach out to me. I'll reach out to him, see what kind of additional insights, guidance, knowledge I can get. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks a million. All right.